Okay, welcome back. In this next video, we are going to be talking about the third type of tissue, which is muscle tissue. In a separate video, we talked about epithelium. Another video, we talked about connective tissue. And now in this video, we're going to talk about muscle tissue. Now, muscle tissue is not as difficult to learn as connective tissue, which has all those different categories of connective tissue proper, which had the loose and dense, and then it had supporting connective tissue and fluid connective tissue. And remember, epithelium had simple and stratified, and then you had to know, was it simple squamous, simple cuboidal, and simple columnar? It had all those different categories. So muscle, it's either going to be skeletal muscle, if the muscle attaches to any part of your skeleton, the framework. It'll be cardiac muscle if it's associated with your heart. And smooth muscle, which is sometimes called visceral muscle, if it attaches to blood vessels, if it's attached or associated with the intestines or the trachea or the bronchioles. There's smooth muscle there, and smooth muscle can constrict or dilate. The other thing I want you to look at is that cardiac muscle and smooth muscle are both involuntary. You do not have conscious voluntary control as you do with skeletal muscle. We know that with skeletal muscle, it is involved with voluntary movement. You have conscious control. Here in this picture, it's looking at the triceps muscle. The triceps is going from the scapula down to the ulnar, attaching to the olecranon process. And when the brain makes a decision to make it contract, move, these protein fibers that we see here, we just call them striations, but they're really made up of contractile proteins and structural proteins and regulatory proteins. When we get into muscles in more depth, especially skeletal muscles, we'll talk about those three types of proteins, contractile proteins, regulatory proteins, and structural proteins. The main contractile proteins are called actin and myosin. And actin and myosin, actin is thin, myosin is thicker. When the light passes through them under a microscope, it gives it this striated appearance. Okay, they are multinucleated. They have these obvious striations, and again, you can voluntarily contract the skeletal muscle. When we compare this to cardiac muscle, one of the things that we see in both of these is the way the light passes through the proteins here. Again, striated. The only difference is that the cardiac muscle is branched. We see branches. Okay, so we see like here, this is one branch, then this is another branch. We see another branch. We see here, one branch, another branch. They're highly branched. Okay. The other thing that we see that we don't see in skeletal muscle are these things called intercalated discs. This is really just the junction of where one heart cell and another heart cell join. Those are called intercalated discs. If we were to separate them and look inside an intercalated disc, we'd see that they are made up of gap junctions. Remember different types of cell junctions like tight junctions, gap junctions, desmosomes, hemidesmosomes, adherens junctions. It's really just a way of bringing cells together to make tissues. So in this particular case with the heart, what brings heart cells together are gap junctions, and gap junctions are utilized for cells that require fast, rapid forms of communication. And that's because when we look at the heart is really four chambers. We have the two atrium, the top chambers, and then we have the two bottom chambers called ventricles. And both atriums contract at the same time. And then the ventricles contract at the same time. But how does like this heart cell here communicate with that heart cell there? So that both left and right atriums contract at the same time. It is the gap junctions for fast, rapid forms of communication. Okay, when we look at smooth muscle is not striated. That's why it looks smooth, but they're spindle shaped. Okay, they are spindle shaped. They have a central nuclei with no striations. Smooth muscle is sometimes called visceral muscle. The location of them, they're going to find them mostly in the walls of all of these hollow organs, whether it's the stomach, whether it's the esophagus, whether it's the colon, whether it's your blood vessels, whether it's the uterus. Smooth muscle is involuntary. That uterus contracts without conscious control. Your blood vessels can constrict or dilate without conscious control. Okay? The colon can constrict without conscious control. So those are the three main types of muscle: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. When we come back, we'll talk about the last type of tissue called nervous tissue, specifically the neuron, when we come back. We'll be back after these